We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Hey, if you want to stay in the loop of all things Security Weekly related, you can do so by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe and subscribing on your favorite podcast catcher, signing up on our YouTube channel or our mailing list, and of course, joining our Discord server. Also, our next live webcast will be on April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, where you will learn how to prepare for modern ransomware attacks. Not to be confused with ancient ransomware attacks. Do this by visiting securityweekly.com/webcast to register now. Of course, if you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, you can find all of this content on demand at securityweekly.com/on-demand. All right. We'll get back to the discussion momentarily. I just want to kind of set the stage. You know, we've been talking in the first segment about how everybody hates report writing and how PlexTrac provides a way to greatly enhance and alleviate the burden or the pain of the report writing associated with compliance standards, PCI being an onerous one, as I'm very familiar, FFIEC being another one. Of course, on Paul's Security Weekly, we talk at great length about how PlexTrac helps the pen tester write their reports. We want to jump back into that discussion, sort of round it out, and of course, Shawn, show us your best shot, show us how it all works. But I think the other application that hopefully we can touch on, the other big pain in organizations that I see and that many of us see, is the way that the way the companies attempt to do vulnerability management. They've got all sorts of different tools that are producing vulnerability reports and other different types of findings, logs, outputs, and that all tends to get aggregated. And I know we've talked, Dan, on PSW about how the number one vulnerability management tracking tool in the world by far is Microsoft Excel. So hopefully we want to touch a little bit on how you guys might be able to help in that arena as well. Of course, the hosts have questions they'll intersperse and ask. And Shawn, I'll send it back to you to pick up where we left off.
Hey, thanks so much. When we left off, we were just kind of discussing and talking through the administration of something like the PCI ROC and PlexTrac. And we're not going to bore you with sitting here and filling out a bunch of questions, but I kind of want to go to the next phase in the workflow and how you would perform this sort of activity in PlexTrac. So after you've finished completing all the activities for the framework, you submit the framework. And when you do submit this framework, this assessment, what it does is it takes all of the questions that have been presented that exist in the assessment you took, and it puts them into the data structure of a finding. And what's nice, you just mentioned, vulnerability management. All of the reports in PlexTrac, regardless of the source, they all follow the same data structure. So it makes it very easy from a user education perspective. If I hop into the report findings for this, this report that has been generated from the PCI data that I just entered, you can see that I can now select any one of these. I'm going to go ahead and just sort these and come to the area. What I'm showing on my screen right now is that you can see the data, the lorem ipsum dummy data that I put in for this question. However, you may not want to hit print on a report the moment that you finished actually administering the assessment. So all of the data that you submit is fully editable. You can come back in if you didn't like the particular observations you made. You want to polish them so that they're in a format that is ready. Your recommendations, perhaps you want to write out what those are. you do have the option of pre-populating your recommendations. So especially with some of these smaller frameworks, such as like CIS-20, if you don't have a software and asset inventory, there's not 100 different ways I'm going to tell you what to do, right? So one of the things you can do is you can pre-populate the recommendations for any of the controls and then have the opportunity to modify those. But after you have finished polishing all the data, you've taken what you collected during administration of the assessment. We would love to live in a world where nobody ever hits print. Nobody exports a document and hands somebody a 300-page, Word doc or PDF. But we understand that, there's requirements. PCI requires that you submit in the ROC. They have requirement templates for a lot of their other products as well. And they're, quite frankly, a lot of organizations, they just want to document. With PlexTrac, whether it's vulnerability management, whether it's framework-based assessment, pen testing, when you go to export into a document, what it looks like is different for every person. It is what you want it to look like. We take the desired output from what you are doing now or what the framework requires, and we work backwards to put the data in there. So I have just submitted this assessment. So one thing I'm going to need to do is ensure that I'm using the appropriate template to export into what I want this data to be exported into. So you see, I have chosen the PCI ROC template. So I am going to now just simply export the data into a Word document. And depending upon the size of the framework, it can take up to a minute. I think when I was exporting last night, the FFIEC was taking me about 40 seconds, but that one was quick. So I'm going to swap over now my sharing and just give you an example of what this can look like coming out of PlexTrac. And remember, once again, it really is whatever you need it to look like. So if I bring this up here, here we've got, and I'll blow this up for your viewers. Here's the first question that I answered, and we have our radial answer, and here's all that lorem ipsum that I had pre-populated. So it very cleanly exports all the data that you've input into this particular template, and you can see there where I stopped adding sample data. But regardless of whether it's PCI ROC, whether it is FFIEC, CMMC, the way that it looks in export is whatever you need it to look like, which quite frankly is some work for us, right? Especially when working with things like PCI Council. But that's what we're here for. And everyone, once again, even with things like ISO 27001, I would say from my experience, there's probably 4 times as many gap assessments going on as actual ISO 27001 certifications. And so every consultancy that we work with, they've got their own flavor. They've got their own set of consolidated questions. They've taken the Annex A controls, they've distilled them down into something more manageable based upon the maturity of their client. And so that's where the flexibility of what we're doing in PlexTrac comes into play. Is you can take whatever the assessment is, whether you baked it up yourself from scratch or whether you're implementing an industry standard, and you have the same usability, same format, fit, and function for your users.
Yeah, so I think, Shawn, maybe bring up the analytics dashboard. But while you're doing that, I do want to highlight that we remove a lot of friction in the assessment taking process, the ability to have multiple people work on that assessment and then get it into the normalized format. From there, you can assign those issues out. So you can assign those, and you could create JIRA tickets automatically or ServiceNow tickets automatically straight from that assessment, and start to actually work on the actual compliance aspects. So you can use PlexTrac as your tracking system for that. One other nice thing, when we talk about marrying vulnerability management and pen testing and maybe, instant response tabletop exercises, all those kinds of things, is that it all normalizes to the same structure and the same type of findings, and they all can be tagged and correlated together, right? So you can tag a specific finding, or you can tag a vulnerability scan like, hey, this vulnerability scan was done in the PCI CDE, right? So any findings that are related to that scan do affect your compliance with the was it 7 or 9? I forget. What your vulnerability management aspects of maintaining and running a vulnerability management program for PCI, or which findings are affecting my compliance on these types of controls, right? So you can. The nice thing about PlexTrac is have the flexibility for tagging all the types of data, like a client, a report, a finding, and an asset. And so then we can go over to the analytics dashboard to really then slice and dice the data to show progress. You can show year over year as well. And that's one other thing that I'll highlight about the assessments module is once you've taken an assessment, you can come back to it and you can basically hit a button, copy it, and it automatically picks up for, say, the next time you're doing that assessment, keeps all the information that you inserted in. So it saves that time of having to maybe copy and paste to a different directory or things like that. But you can basically redo the same assessment, have all the information from the previous, and continue to be off and running. But just go ahead, Shawn, speak to what you're showing.
Yeah, so Dan was just was mentioning about how the analytics can help you in tracking your remediation, and I made some comments earlier about using or having the ability for a stakeholder to rapidly find the things that are important to them. So while Dan was chatting, I went ahead and I went into a different report, not the one that came from the PCI assessment that I submitted, but one that I just imported an SS file. And I tagged a number of those findings with PCI cardholder data environment, but I forgot the E. Excuse me. So
Shame
I
on
can
you.
use tags. Sorry?
That's blasphemy, Shawn. To forget.
But can I ask you? Can I ask you a question though in reference to the findings in this? So if I'm going in and I'm doing, say, I'm in a risk committee meeting and I bring a dashboard up. So where's there a dashboard or a findings that tells me to say my performance, both strategically and tactically, the information I've imported, where I am, and then what my exposure is, so we can actually have a point of conversation about accountability, especially when it comes to compliance, knowing that I have this information at my fingertips, but I need to have it in a format that they can understand in simple terms, right? Because I'm going to go in there, but I don't want to print out a report and give out 20 different reports to everybody. What can we do with the platform to give us that insight to say, hey, here's our performance, here's where we are today, and this is where we're going to project in the next 30 days kind of thing. But by the way, here's our exposure because these certain things are not getting accomplished in time.
Sure. So I would say the first thing that I would do is I would have an understanding of what the stakeholders actually want as far as information, because one of the challenges, quite frankly, that we've had, and then, we've talked to a number of members of boards because ultimately at the end of the day, we want to provide in PlexTrac the best possible analytics and information that answers the questions that the stakeholders, the C-levels, the board members have. I would love it if you have the Rosetta Stone that gives me the answer to what that is, because the answers are legion, which is why we've tried to focus in PlexTrac on creating a platform that allows you to, as easily as possible, pick and choose what it is you want, right? So we do some aggregation, some benchmarking, and I will show that. But the approach that we fundamentally take is that we have tried to give you as many filters as you could possibly dream of. What clients do I want to see the data from? What tags from clients? What tags on findings? What severities? What reports? What dates? Even how I want to see my data. So that I can get to the point where I'm only presenting the data that is germane to the conversation that we're having, right? And isn't cluttered with the 5,000 informationals that I got from the last Nessus scan, right?
Yeah.
But once you get down to that level of detail, we provide some high level, stuff about the status, the number of findings, things like that, where those things are coming from by the client organization. But then we actually get down to where the rubber meets the road. What is it that's actually the risk, right? And so we provide the most critical issues. Now, the higher level stuff I think you're talking about, we have some of that available today in our trends.
Okay.
So this data in our trends area is designed to give you some of that that more aggregate level view that you're referring to. Now, I just provisioned this server last night, so I do not have good historical data here that I'm sharing with you folks. But what this chart is here to show you is your trend of issues that you're opening versus closing over time. Once again, all the same filters that allow you to hone in on the data that you're looking for over here on the right-hand side. Ideally, I tell everybody, go ahead.
Yeah, because I was going to say, the one thing I wanted to add to the second part of it is that, accountability is huge, right? Especially in compliance. We need to bring accountability. It's not within the GRC or the ERM realm or security. It's including everybody. But how do you say, okay, in our trend or in our process that we have outstanding items that we can bring to the table to say, here's accountability, in essence, creating a wall of shame, per se, of people that are outside the norm of, say, information security or IT that everybody presumes should be doing the work, but you have data owners or departmental managers that are literally not circumventing the process, but are failing to meet a requirement because they've been assigned a task. So how do you present that in reporting as part of that process in the dashboard, i.e., or in a report?
So I think I'd like to tell you what we do today, and then if it's okay, I'll be honest about what I think that I'd like to see and that what we've got plans on implementing in 2021.
Absolutely.
So today, I think the best place for that sort of data that you're looking at, and once again, I don't have a good data set in here. I should have done a little more prep work. Didn't realize we're going to be deep in analytics today. But what you have in our trends of analytics is your mean time to remediation. It doesn't say mean time to remediation, but that's what this is. And the data that is here is based upon the filters that you've put in place. So if you want to identify, okay, I want to take a look at my mean time to remediation, and I want to look at the things that are in my PCI cardholder data environment, I can filter down to the data. And I've got only highs and mediums at this point. And I've closed none of these, quite frankly. And so, but if I had, what I get now here is my average mean time to remediation. Now, Dan, obviously there's no data here and it looks great. I'm instantly closing things, but do you want to maybe talk about some of the strategic initiatives we have towards additional SLAs and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, we're what we're working on right now is building in benchmarks for different severities of findings and for different types of clients. I would say one way that you can show some accountability today in the analytics is by having those clients, being able to break them down by client, right? In the findings view, you can see which clients are causing the most concerns, right? So that is one way that we provide accountability. On the document export, and then we have the data behind it. We're just continuing to work out some additional dashboarding. Is like, hey, how many issues are assigned to this group of individuals, right? Both at the asset level as well as the finding level, because you can do that today in PlexTrac. You can assign issues. You'll notice when you get assigned an issue, the little bell icon lights up in the top right, and you get an email. And so part of the SLA benchmark initiative that we're building out right now, it's actually being worked on. I'm not lying about that. Is that not only can you set benchmarks of like, hey, for critical severity findings, these need to be closed out in 2 days. Here's the escalation path if not, right? So here's who gets notified if they're not getting closed out in that time frame, and then we'll have that. We have that data today, and then being able to provide that in the analytics dashboard is on the near horizon, right?
Okay.
It's interesting to me, at least, that you're attempting to do something here that I think is on the wish list of lots of people that never get around to it. And we talked a little bit on off air and a little bit on Discord about other applications. How do you get started? I mean, I know you've got sort of boilerplate templates for existing stuff, but if somebody wants to jump onto PlexTrac and give it a try, but they've got their own little way of doing things, what's the best way to just kind of get started?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that in the context of a framework-based assessment because there's so many different things you can do. Does that work?
Sure.
Yeah, so this is the workflow that we do with our partners, and part of the process that my team does as we bring people on is we don't want you to have to learn the platform in order to get in all the intricacies to get running. So we do a lot of work helping our partners during the onboarding process. But I always start by working backwards. I start with, what are you providing your stakeholders today? what does that look like physically? Like what data are you giving them? If you give them a document, what's on there? If you give them a spreadsheet, what's on there, right? What is the end state you're trying to get to? Are there metrics that you're building, right? Giving the total number of compliant by domain inside of something. Once I understand what the data is that they want to present, that's when actually we take a step back and we go into the assessments module, and we might take a stock framework, something like, say, CMMC maturity level 1 through 4. And you would then take the stock file that we're happy to provide you, or you can pull some of these things off of our website. And maybe for your particular workflow, in addition to having the question and what the actual answer is as far as the compliance status, you also want to give them, hey, what are the observed current controls in place? The recommendation, if you want to do that on the fly. Are there, once again, are there perhaps pre-planned or authoritative recommendations? I think I pulled these straight out of the Appendix B of the CMMC standard. So once we know here, our particular references, and why are all these things in here? Because these are things that people want to provide in their final data to their stakeholder, right? Here's a process statement. So once we know what the end goal is, then we work backwards and we take a stock framework, or if you've got your own, once again, getting back to that concept of a gap assessment where you distilled something down into a more manageable set of questionnaires, then we just create a schema, quite frankly. And every single question will have your, obviously the question, it'll have this type of answer set. That's another question you have to ask yourself. How do I want people to answer this? We have a whole lot of built-in answer sets that you can use, but you can define your own. I don't know if I've defined any for this. I don't think I have, but you can define your own set of answers. So really it's just a process of starting from what do you want the deliverable to look like? And then we just work back to the beginning. How do we want to structure things?
Yeah, and then I'll just highlight that Shawn highlighted that we really truly do view working with our customers as partners. But you're not prohibited from coming in and creating your own questionnaire right out of the gate, with either a copy of some of the pre-built ones or just translating your current one straight in. Obviously, if you take advantage of working with us, we'll help you, but it's pretty straightforward, as you can see here in the platform, to be able to just build out your own questionnaire from scratch, or bring one in from another source.
Absolutely. When you are creating a questionnaire, it really is a choose your own adventure game. Obviously, you give it a title and a question, but I want what is your favorite color, right? And that can be a radial button full of answers. Yes, no, that doesn't make much sense, but I can have as many of these types of radial answers as I want that fit whatever it is I'm trying to get to, right? I can determine whether or not I want to require answering that. If I don't want it to be a radial answer, I can have as many of these different input fields as I want. Who did I interview? Who was the actual auditor? What were those observed controls in place? It really is completely customizable and up to you to match what your current workflow is.
Just a totally offhand remark. Can you use PlexTrac to build your NCAA predictions?
You certainly could send out a survey of everybody to say who's going to win, who are the final four. You certainly could create that.
You should put that in there next year. Just have a build your own bracket feature, just as a little fun side thing. I would be remiss if I didn't ask. When it comes to PCI reporting, there's sort of three different types of questions, very roughly. There's one type of question where, as a QSA, as an assessor, I'm looking for, does the company have some, formal documentation in terms of a policy, a standard, or a procedure, in which case, the response to the question is, what is it? Name the document. Where I see that you have a place where you can upload the document. Does PlexTrac then take the document name and sort of fill that out automatically, or do you have to also type in the name type of thing? That's sort of part A to the question. The second type is evidence. You're supposed to sample a certain number of systems to make sure that they're, let's say, configured correctly, that type of thing. And so you need a list of systems that you looked at. Is that something that you do now, or have a way, have a strategy for building into when it's simply a list of systems, like a sample set type of thing? And then the third type of question is actually, I'm looking at something to see that it's actually done, where I'm very often making a boilerplate type of statement, assessor looked at, fill in the blank, whatever the requirement is that I'm supposed to be looking at. And yes, in fact, it's there type of thing. Do you cover all those three types of questions efficiently at this point?
We do. For the questions, where is it? Did you do the thing or not? Or did you do the thing fully? This is that very rapid, very ugly questionnaire that we just built, but demonstrating that we can do it very quickly. But you can make those sorts of radial decisions here. You can even have, once again, you can have an arbitrary number of radial inputs. But for those questions about what document did I review, I reviewed document number 1. We have the free text. Now, earlier we also uploaded some evidence, right? And so if I were to go back to that PCI sample that we submitted, I did upload a few pieces of evidence for that, right? And for each one of those, and I honestly don't remember which questions I entered them for, but all of the evidence, you get your evidence in 2 fashions. The actual evidence itself, the files, they are in the artifacts sections, which is just a file system, right? And so all of the users can come in, they can download copies of that sort of that file as well. But then actually in each one of the controls themselves, I think it was down here, it may not have been, where I added some artifacts. I did.
Yep, there
you go. So we get the actual name of the document. So you know that in the context of this particular control, that if I want to actually view the sample, I just go grab this document from the artifacts section.
Okay. And I guess to clarify, does every question that needs to be asked, is the answer a manual? Human has to click on, yes, this is compliant, or is, I guess what I was trying to ask was, in the case where it's a matter of, do they have the document and you upload the document, does PlexTrac, draw the conclusion, well, you put a document in the field, so obviously they're meeting the requirement type, so it gets sort of pushed to compliant automatically, or I'm thinking out loud somewhat, but it almost makes sense that would be done, but maybe you still have to go back and validate, all those types of sort of automagic responses manually, but it'd be nice if they were already done for you and you didn't have to manually go through and do it, if that makes sense.
So what we automatically do today is based on what answer you select in the radial button, it will automatically either, you see here the status of closed versus in process versus open. It will do that automatically. It doesn't today, and I mean, I think that's a good question, and we could probably discuss whether or not we should, but if you upload a document, we're not going to necessarily say, oh, that means they're compliant, right? So not today. That still does require that manual intervention to click the button, like, yep, they're compliant or not. And then at that point, we make the assumption that you've gone and validated that whatever they put up there is what they say it is. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Sure. Well, last call. Any other tidbits or things you want to show us, Shawn, before we wrap up?
No, I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to chat with you folks and show this off. We've, as I said, this is kind of my baby, my pet project here at PlexTrac, and I don't care if people make fun of. I don't care if the hardcore pen testers make fun of me. I love it.
Yeah, you can't help it if the baby's ugly. It is what it is. Well, I appreciate you guys, because in a world where all the vendors like to talk about having solutions, you guys actually do have a tool. You have something that helps people do a job, and I don't think there's any illusion that it's a solution, and that's a good thing in my opinion. Appreciate you guys, coming on today, and I feel like it was a lot less painful than advertised, and I apologize for that. But you guys are more on the same page as I am than perhaps sometimes comes across on PSW. But for our listening and viewing audience, if you want to check out PlexTrac, you can go to securityweekly.com/PlexTrac, and that'll get you to start it with everything you want to learn about PlexTrac. Dan, Shawn, thank you so much for your willingness to come on the show today. It's been a little bit of a change of pace for us, a little bit more PCI focused than probably most people are comfortable. And are Dan and Shawn, are either of you on our Discord server? I think, Dan, you are.
I am. I mean, I'm not logged in there right now, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, we have a tradition, since we broadcast in the daytime, of jumping over to the after party on the Discord server, where we have a chance to chat live with our audience. You are welcome to come join us if time allows. But thank you for coming today. Thank you for sharing what you've got. Thank you for showing that PCI isn't as onerous as people think it is. That's going to wrap for today, and we will join some in the after party. Otherwise, we'll see y'all next week. Thank you.